Spring of 1963. A small office in Maranello, Italy. Ford executives have flown across the Atlantic carrying a check for $18 million. And they're sitting across from a 65-year-old man in dark sunglasses who hasn't slept properly in 3 nights. His name is Enzo Ferrari. He's about to read one specific clause in the contract, throw down his pen, insult everyone in the room, and walk out to lunch. And when he does, he'll trigger the most expensive personal grudge match in the history of motorsport. That single moment, that one ruined afternoon in Italy, gave the world the Ford GT40. Here's what people get wrong about this story. They think the GT40 was a triumph of American engineering. It wasn't. Not at first. It was a revenge project. A $250 million tantrum thrown by the richest man in Detroit because an old Italian had embarrassed him over a contract. And what makes it incredible isn't that Ford eventually beat Ferrari at Le Mans. It's that they beat him so completely, so publicly, and so humiliatingly that Ferrari's racing program never fully recovered. Today, we're going to walk through the actual story, the deal that collapsed, the secret weapon Ford hid in Texas, the test track speed run that no one believed, and the rainy afternoon in France where one driver got robbed of the greatest win in motorsport's history by a rule nobody knew existed.
Hit subscribe before we get into it, and drop your next muscle car request in the comments. Top comment becomes next week's video. Let's go. So back to that Maranello office. Ford had spent months on the Ferrari deal. They'd flown executives over, audited the factory, hired translators, paid lawyers, the whole circus. And the agreement on the table was straightforward enough. Ford would buy 90% of Ferrari for $18 million. Enzo could keep running the racing side, everyone wins. Except Enzo Ferrari hated bureaucracy more than he liked money. And tucked into the contract was a clause that said Ford would have to approve any major racing expenditure. To Detroit, that was standard accounting. To Enzo, it was a leash. Worse, the same agreement said Ferrari couldn't run open-wheel cars at Indianapolis because Ford already raced there and didn't want the competition. That was the part that really lit the fuse. He read the clause. He stared at it. He looked at his secretary, Franco Cozzi, and said, "Let's go eat." Then he stood up and walked out.
When the news got back to Detroit, Henry Ford II didn't yell. He didn't fire anyone. He turned to one of his lieutenants, a man named Don Frey, and said something close to, "You go to Le Mans, and you beat his ass." 6 words. That's the entire mission statement of one of the most expensive racing programs ever built. Now here's the thing about Le Mans in 1963. Ferrari owned it. Ferrari had won the 24 Hours of Le Mans 6 straight years. They didn't just win it, they lapped the competition. They built cars specifically for that race, with engines tuned for one specific stretch of French road called the Mulsanne Straight. And nobody, not Aston Martin, not Jaguar, not Mercedes, had been able to touch them. The idea that Ford, a company that built family sedans and pickup trucks in the Midwest, was going to walk into Europe's most prestigious race and beat Ferrari was, frankly, ridiculous. The first attempt proved it. Ford couldn't build a Le Mans car from scratch. They didn't have the experience. So they did what big American companies always do when they need engineering they don't have. They went shopping. They found Eric Broadley, a British race car designer who'd built something called the Lola Mk6, a small, low, mid-engine prototype that had shown real promise at Le Mans. Ford bought the design, hired Broadley, set up a workshop in England, and started building what would become the GT40. The name was literal. The car was 40 inches tall at the roof, squat, wide, ugly in a beautiful way, and powered by a 4.2-liter V8 from the Shelby Cobra program. They took 3 of them to Le Mans in 1964. All 3 broke. Transmission failures, oil leaks, electrical gremlins. Ferrari took first, second, third. The Americans went home humiliated. Henry Ford II was, in the polite phrasing of the era, displeased. The 1965 attempt was barely better. 6 GT40s entered. None of them finished. Ferrari swept the podium again.
At this point, Ford had spent the equivalent of tens of millions of dollars on this revenge project and had nothing to show for it but a fleet of broken race cars and 2 years of Italian smirking. This is where Carroll Shelby walks into the story, and the whole thing changes. Shelby was a chicken farmer from Texas who'd won Le Mans himself in 1959 driving an Aston Martin. He built the Shelby Cobra. He understood race cars the way a chef understands a kitchen. Ford handed him the GT40 program and basically said, "Fix this, or we're done." Shelby brought in a development driver named Ken Miles, a British-born racer in his late 40s with a thick accent, a sharp tongue, and the kind of mechanical instinct that you can't teach.
Shelby and Miles tore the program apart. They threw out the small block engine and dropped in a 7.0-liter, 427 cubic inch V8, same basic engine Ford was using to dominate NASCAR. Big, simple, lazy, and bulletproof. The bet was that high-strung exotic engines, the kind Ferrari favored, would never survive 24 hours of flat-out racing. A relaxed, understressed American big block, on the other hand, could run for a day without complaint. Lower the red line, fatten the oil galleries, beef up the cooling, and let the displacement do the work. The new car was called the GT40 Mk II. Ken Miles took it out to Ford's test track and ran it to 201 miles per hour. 201! In a car designed in the early 60s, on tires that wouldn't pass a basic modern safety test, on a track with no runoff. The official Ford power rating was 485 horsepower, but that was a deliberate underestimate. The real number was somewhere around 550. Ford had set the engine's rev limit low specifically for endurance racing, which meant the car was running well below its actual potential just to survive the full 24 hours.
The 1966 Le Mans race wasn't a fair fight. Ford showed up with 8 Mark II prototypes and 5 Mark I cars in the Group 4 class. 13 Fords. Carroll Shelby ran 3 cars. Holman and Moody, the NASCAR legends, prepared 6 more. The Ford racing budget for Le Mans 1966 alone was bigger than Ferrari's entire corporate budget for the year. This wasn't sportsmanship. This was a strategic carpet bombing. Ferrari brought 7 cars. They lost the qualifying battle on day 1. Dan Gurney put a Ford GT40 on pole position with a lap time of 3 minutes, 30.6 seconds. Ferrari's fastest car was a full second slower. The race hadn't even started, and Ford was already winning. Then, the rain came. For 24 hours in pouring French rain, the Fords beat the absolute hell out of the Ferraris. The big NASCAR engines didn't care about the weather. The Mulsanne Straight, that long stretch where Ferraris had always pulled away, became Ford's killing ground. The GT40s were hitting speeds of 210 miles per hour down that straight. Ferrari watched it happen in real time. One by one, their cars dropped out.
Going into the final hour, Ken Miles was leading the race. He'd been the one to develop this car. He'd been the one to push it to 201 miles per hour. He'd already won the 24 hours of Daytona and the 12 hours of Sebring earlier that year. And if he won Le Mans, he'd become the first driver in history to take all 3 endurance racing crowns in a single season. The Triple Crown. Untouched before, untouched since. Miles was about 34 seconds ahead of the number 2 Ford, driven by Bruce McLaren and Chris Amon. He was driving carefully, conservatively, following Carroll Shelby's instructions to slow down and bring the car home. That's when Ford's PR team had what they thought was a brilliant idea. 3 Fords were running first, second, and third. What if they crossed the finish line side by side, in formation, like fighter jets? Imagine the photograph. Imagine the headlines. Henry Ford II loved it. The PR director, a man named Leo Beebe, gave the order. Slow Miles down. Let McLaren catch up. Have all 3 cars finish in a perfect line.
When Carroll Shelby walked into the Ford pit and told Miles the plan, Miles was furious. He thought it was a setup. He told his crew chief, Charlie Agapio, that Ford was trying to take the win away from him because they didn't like him. Agapio tried to reassure him. "You're miles ahead," he said. "There's no way McLaren can catch you in the time left. Just go with it."
What nobody in the Ford garage knew at that moment was that the Automobile Club de l'Ouest, the organizers of Le Mans, had a rule for situations like this. If two cars finished side by side on the same lap, the car that had started further back on the grid would be declared the winner. The logic was that the car starting further back had technically traveled a slightly longer distance over 24 hours. McLaren's car had qualified second on the grid, behind Miles. McLaren had started about 8 meters, roughly 26 feet, further back than Miles. 8 meters. That's the difference between Ken Miles becoming the only Triple Crown winner in motorsport history and Ken Miles being a footnote. The cars came down the final stretch in the rain, side by side. Photographers were going crazy. The crowd was on its feet. And as they crossed the line, McLaren nudged about a car length ahead, 6 meters or so. The PA announcer initially said Miles had won. The Ford garage thought Miles had won. Even McLaren and Amon, sitting in the number 2 car, weren't sure what had happened. Then the officials walked over. The trophy got handed to McLaren and Amon, and the truth started to settle in. Miles had been robbed by a technicality nobody on the Ford team knew about until it was too late.
Miles, by all accounts, said exactly 5 words when he figured out what had happened. "I think we've been screwed." 2 months later, Ken Miles was killed testing the next generation GT40 prototype at Riverside Raceway in California. He was 47 years old. He never raced at Le Mans again. He never got another shot at the Triple Crown. Carroll Shelby, who had pushed for the staged finish, spent the rest of his life saying he wished he'd never agreed to it. In a 1997 interview, more than 30 years later, Shelby was still calling the ACO ruling a made-up rule and saying flatly that Ken Miles had won that race. Whether you believe Miles was the rightful winner, or whether you side with Chris Amon, who insisted years later that he and McLaren would have won anyway if Ford hadn't given them the slowdown order, the photograph of those 3 Ford GT40s crossing the line together remains one of the most iconic images in motorsports. 3 American cars, side by side, at a French race that Italy had owned for 6 years. Ferrari finished the 1966 Le Mans with their best car in 8th place. And that wasn't even a real Ferrari, it was a privateer entry.
In 1967, Ford brought a new car, the GT40 Mk IV, and won Le Mans again. This time, it was Dan Gurney and AJ Foyt taking the checkered flag. Gurney was the one who started the tradition of spraying champagne on the podium, by the way, because he was just happy to be alive after 24 hours of racing in the rain. In 1968, Ford won Le Mans for a 3rd straight year. By that point, Ferrari had pulled out of the prototype class entirely. They couldn't compete. The Italian racing program that had ruled Le Mans for 6 consecutive years now couldn't even finish a car in the top 3. In 1969, Ford won a 4th straight time, although by then they'd handed the actual race operation to John Wyer's privateer team. 4 Le Mans wins in a row, the longest dominant streak by any American manufacturer in the history of the race. Ferrari wouldn't win Le Mans overall again until 2023. Think about that. Enzo Ferrari walked out of a meeting in 1963 over a contract clause he didn't like, and his company's racing reputation took 60 years to recover from the revenge that single moment triggered. The grudge that Henry Ford II nursed for less than 3 years cost Ferrari.
The car was 40 inches tall because aerodynamic engineers calculated that any taller would create too much frontal drag at speeds above 180 miles per hour. Anyone over 6 feet had a hell of a time fitting inside. Ken Miles, who was around 5'10", reportedly hit his head on the roof during the 1966 race because of an issue with the door not closing properly. He had to come into the pits on the first lap to get it fixed. That actually happened. The movie didn't make that up. The car burned through tires faster than anything Le Mans had ever seen. McLaren and Amon's car had Firestone tires that were giving them serious problems early in the race, and there's a famous story about tire executives literally arguing with each other in the pit lane about whether to switch to Goodyears. They eventually did. It probably cost the team enough time that they'd have won outright without the staged finish. There's also the story of the brake rotors. During the race, Ken Miles' car came in for a brake change. The rotors his crew put on weren't the ones that had been pre-bedded in for his car. Those had somehow ended up with the McLaren crew. Whether this was sabotage, miscommunication, or genuine accident has been debated for 60 years. Charlie Agapio, Miles' crew chief, went to his grave believing it was deliberate. Other people on the team insisted it was just chaos in a long race. Either way, it cost Miles close to 2 laps in extra pit time. Without that delay, the staged finish wouldn't have happened because McLaren wouldn't have been close enough to stage anything.
Original 1966 Le Mans winning GT40s today sell for somewhere north of $20 million at auction when they come up, which is almost never. There are only a handful of authentic, race-documented Mark II chassis still in existence, and most are in private collections or museums. The chassis that won the actual 1966 race, GT40 P/1046, is owned by an American collector who paid for the privilege of having the most important American race car ever built sitting in his garage. The 7.0-liter engine architecture that powered the GT40 to victory ended up being one of the most successful big block V8s Ford ever built. It powered NASCAR cars, drag racers, the Shelby Cobra 427, the Ford Galaxy, and eventually became the basis for the engine in the 1969 Boss 429 Mustang we talked about in last week's video. And here's the part that I find genuinely incredible. The whole thing, the entire GT40 program, the Le Mans wins, the embarrassment of Ferrari, the 4-year campaign of total motorsport dominance came out of a single conversation in an Italian office that lasted maybe 20 minutes. Henry Ford II didn't set out to build the greatest endurance race car of all time. He set out to make Enzo Ferrari look bad. The greatness was almost a side effect. He spent something on the order of $250 million in modern money to humiliate one Italian old man who'd insulted him during a contract negotiation. And he got the greatest American race car in history out of it, almost by accident.
Sometimes the best things in racing come out of business deals that fall apart at the last minute. That's the GT40 in a sentence. If this story's the kind of thing you want more of, hit subscribe. Drop your next muscle car or race car request in the comments, and we'll see you on the next one.